So we are here today to have a fireside chat with Brooke Singer. So I've got a little bit of an intro on Brooke, and unfortunately I'm going to read this because I didn't have time to memorize it. But I want to make sure that you all understood who Brooke is before we get in this really interesting conversation on the gender dynamics in pay inequity in sports, between men and women's sports. So Brooke is a 21-year-old athlete, fashion designer, and activist who's used her determination and multifaceted talents to further many issues affecting women in today's world. So Brooke has ultimately been the representation of unapologetic authenticity, whether she's conquering the fashion world or she's strapping on her cleats and playing women's professional tackle football. Brooke has devoted a lot of her time and unique experiences and accomplishments to advocate for women's issues, including those related to athletic participation and other social causes. So, who is Brooke on paper? She's a soccer-playing football queen who's been playing sports her entire life. And while she was playing soccer at the collegiate level at FIT, she was named the school's Athlete of the Year in 2021 and 2022 for her performance in goal. Brooke also plays professional women's tackle football for the New York Wolves of the Women's Football Alliance. And this past July, she helped lead the New York Wolves to a D2 national championship victory. So welcome, Brooke Singer.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Woo! Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thanks for the introduction.
So I'm going to get right into it. I think we are best starting this conversation with you sharing your personal journey and how you got started in women's professional tackle football.
Okay. Well, let's start from the beginning here. I think that's the best way to do it. I have always loved sports. Like you said, I was a soccer player, first and always a soccer player, but now a football player. And a lot of people question how I can do that as a female. And so in growing up around sports, my brother was a quarterback, and my dad was a sports medicine doctor. So when I tell you I grew up around football, I grew up around football.
Right.
I was living at that stadium. We would take naps there, all that jazz. And so it wasn't until I was about in eighth grade, that's when I first got the inkling that I could play. So what is it, like 13, 14 years being surrounded by football. I loved the game. I loved watching it. I loved being around it and a part of it. But I never thought that I could be in it. And it wasn't until my father showed me a video of a kicker. It was on ESPN. There was a video of this kicker who won homecoming queen and kicked the game-winning field goal in the same game. He calls me and he shows it to me. And that changed the rest of my life. One video of one female changed the rest of my life. And the second I saw that, I said, oh, okay, challenge accepted. Well, I'm going to do that.
Right. So then what challenges did you face when you were trying to pursue playing football in a male-dominated sport, especially at high schools, right? There aren't female programs. So, I mean, I'm going to assume to say that you probably played for the men's team.
Yes. So in high school, I joined the boys' team. And that in itself was not automatic. And a lot of credit to Title IX because there was no women's team. And so now having this one female representation that did it, that was all I needed to say, I can do it. And I went up to that football coach and I said, hi, I'm here. Like, I would love to try out. And he looked at me and he was like, for cheerleading? Like, it's over there. I was like, no, not cheerleading. I want to play football. And initially it was the no. Mm-hmm. He left it at that. Came back the next year. Again, hi, like, you remember me? I'm ready. I want to play football. Oh, we don't need you. We have somebody. Like, no. It was a little bit nicer that time, but, and then finally the next year, I was going into junior year. It was that summer. I had come up to him and I said, listen, you don't have to let me on the team, but let me try out. If I'm not good enough, then don't let me on the team. That's fine. But give me the same opportunity that you give those boys to be on this team. Hardest kicker tryouts of my life, I'll tell you that. But I got on the team. And unfortunately, the struggle did not stop there. If anything, it was all ahead of me.
And how poignant to note that it's the opportunity still at first that you were never given to even have that tryout. And then you still, once you finally get there, after you had to do more than the boys did to even just show up to try out, you still then felt like you were not treated equally on the team, right?
Yeah, 100%. And it really, really bothered me because it was almost like some people saw it as in, you should be grateful for this opportunity. And granted, I want to preface, like, I was the first female to do this, and I guess to break that glass ceiling in this space in the history of the team. So, like, it was all like, you had to tread very lightly, be careful, don't cross the line. And I'm like, why do I have all these special circumstances and special things I either have to deal with or special things I don't get? I didn't understand it because I thought, I'm on the football team now. What's so different? And I think in hindsight, I've come to understand a little bit of the troubles that you face with being the first to do something or the first of somebody or a woman to do something. And at the end of the day, it was difficult, and it really made me question why I wanted to play football.
How many boys on your high school football team play professional football?
None.
How many girls do?
One.
Yay! There we go, right?
Do the math.
Right. So, I mean, look, at the end of the day, I think that there are so many barriers to entry for women in sports, but I think one of the things that is so difficult is, again, just that conversation of opportunity. Not even being given that first step, which is super important. But on a positive note, let's talk about the ways that you've seen women's empowerment within the sport of football, both on and off the field, sort of grow since you were in from high school, right, then going into the professional space. Like, what are some of the joys that you've been able to really revel in sort of changing atmospheres?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. Thank you for asking. There are a few different things. I think first, the increase in the power of self-advocacy that I've been able to experience on the women's division and the women's level of it is empowering. Just to see other women who, because when I was in high school, it was very isolating to kind of feel like I'm fighting this battle alone. But now I'm with incredible, badass women every day. And I mean, there's not many other places where we are running the world in that sense. And just to be surrounded by so much divine, incredible feminine energy, and again, unapologetically.
Yeah.
Because now we're in a safe space in which we can do that.
Actually, I have a question that I don't think I've ever asked you before, what I think would be really interesting to kind of bring into this conversation. How do you get on a women's professional football team? Right? Like, we all know about the combine for the NFL, right? We all know that those guys get training paid for by agencies. They have to go through hoops, literally do jumps, runs, everything to sort of be even considered to go into a draft to go into the NFL. I have absolutely no idea how the process works for women's football. So how did you get into the Women's Football Alliance?
I'm going to start it with the story.
Okay.
Because, and it kind of follows the whole like trajectory of this. Once I was done with high school football, I was crying that night, and I was like, this is it. I loved this game so much because I finally got a glimpse at it. I was like, I'm not going to be able to play anymore because I was barely able to play at that point. So I was like, there's no space for me. I didn't know about the Women's League. And who in here knew about the Women's League already? Probably nobody.
I didn't until I met you.
Exactly. Yeah. So I thought my career or my future in football was over. And it wasn't until I saw somebody on social media, again, importance of representation, saw somebody on social media who was an adult playing, heard about the league, went to Canton, Ohio at the Football Hall of Fame, which is where they played their championship game. And my mom even posted on Facebook saying, I have a feeling she's not done with football yet. And she was right. So how do you get on the team, though? I knew I was going to school in New York for fashion.
Okay.
So after hearing about this league, I was like, I bet they have a New York team. And I didn't want to give it up. So I looked into it, went online. And how teams do it is they hold individual tryouts.
Okay.
So there's a lot of days of tryouts that you have to go through and training things that you have to do in order to get accepted onto this team. And then there's also like transfer portals within teams.
Okay.
But yeah, just kind of, I learned about it, and I don't really take no for an answer quite easily. So I was like, I'll do it. I'll figure out a way to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really cool. It almost sounds a little bit kind of like a repeat of high school, right? Going through those very basic tryouts and sort of finding your space.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Have you played any positions other than kicker? I think that there was a story one time of you tackling a boy. Am I right?
So that was, I was still a kicker back then when I made my first tackle. And I am at first a kicker and always a kicker, but I think it's important in the conversation about women in football is that not all women are kickers. Right now, that is majority of women in playing with their boys. They do start out as kickers because that's really all we were allowed to have access to.
Right.
I wasn't even allowed to be a kicker. And that was like the maybe. So it was kind of like sometimes you have to chip away at the glass ceiling in order to shatter it.
Right.
And that's how it started. Now that I'm in a women's league, I was a goalie in soccer. So my coach now in football looked at my like sports resume and was like, "Oh, a goalie. Does that mean you can catch a ball?" And I was like, "A soccer ball? I don't know." And so he literally, I thought I was there to try out for kicking, and I did, but he had me running these like wide receiver drills that I'd never run before, but again, I think what's amazing about the tryouts and everything in women's football is we don't recruit football players, and they say that.
So where did the majority of those players come from?
We recruit athletes.
Okay, so I can imagine maybe for some of the more running positions in football, you might do track and field, right?
Yes.
Okay, interesting. That's really interesting.
A lot of rugby, too.
Yeah, that
People
makes sense.
from overseas come to play football here.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to change gears a little bit, and I want to talk about some of the harder stuff, and that's these disparities in sport, especially when it comes to revenue, pay, and money. So let's start here. Can you tell me the financial aspects of what it takes to be a women's professional football player, how much it costs for you, if you get paid, because my understanding is that not every team pays their players. So what is the financial repercussions of this sport for women?
Yeah, and it's unfortunate that is right now the standard of practice, or that there is no standard to pay your employees. I mean, I've never heard of another industry that does that.
Well, so let's start there. So then who pays their players and who doesn't?
It depends on the team and the status. So it is individual team based in the division you are in.
Okay.
But so the league does not. And within that, I think it's important that I explain how that works. And a lot of these women are paying to play at this extremely high, or the highest level of football
Right.
you can. And that's unheard of in any other sport. The highest level, I mean, I don't even want to guess how much NFL players make or anything, but I can tell you that they probably have not paid to play that sport maybe at all in their life. But I mean, again, I think that it's unfortunate that that's the standard, but also I think that goes to show that these women really care about this.
Right. So on average, how much do you think it costs a female professional football player to just play?
$500 to $1,000 a season.
Right. And that would be what, for equipment? Or is equipment provided by the team?
Again, it depends on the team. So it's just like you could be just throwing a lot of money at this.
So this is so fascinating that there isn't, again, this standard across all leagues for, I mean, something as simple as equipment.
Yeah.
So you've got the Women's Football Alliance, which you're in. Mm-hmm. What are the other women's professional leagues that exist? Because you're D2, so there is a level above you, right? Mm-hmm. So can you give us a breakdown kind of what that looks like?
Yeah, so the WFA, or the Women's Football Alliance, and I respect the way they did this, because they have the professional division, which they call D1 or pro football. They have D2, and then they have D3, and then they have another below that's like coming up. So
Okay.
they're able to build women's football teams in this way to ultimately get to that professional level. And you have to start this way because we're not playing in high school. Many of us aren't.
Right.
Or you have adults who were athletes and didn't get that opportunity to play
so
football.
Those more infantile leagues levels are almost the training ground.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. So then I imagine a lot of these women have to supplement their income in some way, which could be sponsorship. Now, do you know if the teams have team sponsors? Does your team have any team sponsors?
Right now, I don't believe our team is sponsored by anybody.
What about the league?
Yes, the league does have sponsors.
Okay. So then I must imagine that athlete branding and personal branding has to be a big component if you're trying to make football really the crux of how you're making revenue. So I think we've discussed before how there are a couple women in the space that do sort of make a career out of this, but they're multifaceted, right? They're on camera, They're doing other things that are not just putting on pads and actually playing the game. So how important is personal branding for you? And then how are you able to take personal branding into something in regards to sponsorships or partnerships?
Yeah, and I think obviously this is important to women's football, but to the sports world in general, we're getting into this really personalized and down-to-earth, kind of like opening up this relationship between athletes right now.
Yeah.
And on a micro level too. So for women's football, I think it could be great to have these awesome women be able, if the league or if the teams or if sponsors aren't going to support the specific team or football in itself, then at least these individual players are able to get the support that they deserve and that they are worth.
Sure. Yeah. Have there been any partnerships that you're super proud of that you've been able to implement in your career?
Yeah, I think one of my favorite thing I've done was one with ESPN.
Amazing. Tell us about that. ESPN's a big platform.
Well, so they had reached out and wanting to do a partnership where I was promoting one of the NFL games and watching it. But I think what was great about that was that they're leaning into the target of women. And a lot of times I think women are left out of this football conversation, not even just playing, watching. So I think at the end of the day, them saying, oh, we see you, and we know a lot of your followers and supporters like football and like this conversation. We're talking about opening up doors for new viewership and new people to come in and say, oh, I really like it. We talked about the Taylor Swift thing earlier.
Right.
Like, so many more young girls or young boys that may not have thought to like football before and now are watching because Taylor Swift is going to be on for a split second.
Right.
But then they're in and they're watching, and that's when then they can fall in love with it.
Yeah. You know, I'll tell the room. So Brooke was actually included in Wilson, which is an enormous sporting equipment company, actually one of their campaigns a couple years ago. And I think one of the reasons in particular you were chosen is that there are obviously hundreds of girls that play, or women, sorry, that play women's professional football, but not all of them got picked by Wilson. So I think that you were very keen on what your brand is, and you're also very confident in talking about that. So why don't we talk a little bit about how you have kind of gotten this voice to be able to talk about yourself, especially in a league that most people don't know about and in a sport that most people are not watching, and you're able to then get the attention of a brand like Wilson.
Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to my catchphrase, unapologetically authentic. At the end of the day, I enjoy football, I play football, I am a football player. It really shouldn't have anything to do with my gender, but it does. And I also love fashion.
Right.
I am a fashion designer. I went to fashion school. I'm super hyper feminine. Why can't I be both? And I think that's the story I tell is authentic, and I'm confident in telling that because that's who I am. And if people are either going to like it or they're not, and if they don't like that I'm a female playing football, then okay, move on.
Yeah.
And I think these brands see that, and they also see the potential in women's football, and that's big.
Yeah. One of my favorite quotes is, there's some people out there that don't like Beyonce, right?
Wait, who?
You know, right? But the point is that not everyone's going to like you, right? One thing I just want to continue on the Wilson conversation that I think was really smart is a lot of the activations that Brooke was in with Wilson featured her team. And I think one of the things that Brooke does really well is she understands it's a team sport, that her ability to become more popular and the sport's ability to become more popular is also about the promotion of the team overall. Mm-hmm. So what were some of the activations that you did with Wilson where you were actually giving a, inside look into how the New York Wolves play football?
Yeah, I mean, there were a few day in the lives even, because it's like, what is a female football player? I mean, people don't know, and I didn't know, so it's like, how would you if you're not seeing it? So I was showing what I would do during the day, how I was going to school, completely unrelated, and then trying to be a professional athlete at the same time. I mean, some of the women on my team are mothers. I mean, there's dads in the NFL, but we don't necessarily think of that in their connection. But so these moms were caring for kids. Sometimes you take your kids to practice, and just showing that it's amazing to be around it. And it sucks that more people don't get to do that. So I'm like, okay, I'll show you it then.
Right. What initiatives or changes would you like to see in the future to promote gender equality and financial equity in women's sports overall?
I mean, that's a loaded question. There's a lot that needs to be worked upon. I think, and we've discussed this before, I think we need to see men being supportive.
Giving you just the opportunity to try out.
That's not enough, though.
I know, but that's what I'm saying. Like it almost stopped you there because a man did not even give you the opportunity to try out.
Yeah, I mean, it takes a strong, badass woman to stand up here and say that we need male allyship in order to push this forward.
Right.
It sucks that more people don't get to see how amazing the game of football is. And a lot of high school boys even and men understand this because they've had access to it. A lot of women, or even younger girls, I like to say, it's really hard to grow that interest in it and like fall in love with it in a certain way when you seemingly don't have access to it, when you don't have representation.
Right.
Like imagine if there was a little boy who had never seen football in his life, why would he like football? You know what I mean? If he never saw himself on that screen or a man on that screen, why would he be interested in curating that dream of, I want to be there one day? And it's sad that women don't get that opportunity.
Well, okay, so a couple things here. So one,
I didn't answer your question at all. I'm so sorry.
No, you did to some degree. So one thing that's an interesting tangent here that I know about you is you're actually trying to tackle that head on with a new series that you're doing on TikTok called Football School. So Brooke's got a pretty engaging TikTok, and she came up with the idea when she saw a video at the start of the season about a dad teaching his daughter football, about how she might be able to be a person that can teach younger girls football because she looks like them, and she's, you know, a fashionista, and she's got all these other things that are going for her, but because she plays, she can be more relatable to a younger demographic who might be intimidated about trying to learn what football is in a more macho culture. So where did Football School come from? How are you implementing that online? And like what kind of engagement are you seeing from that?
In all honesty, I think Football School low-key came from my own insecurities.
Okay,
because
that's really fair.
I preface saying I had grown up around the sport of football, which I did, but I still did not fully understand football. And I think it's a great understanding, like my brother did.
Right.
I mean, obviously we were different. Ended up playing different positions, but my dad didn't necessarily sit me down in front of the TV like he did my brother and say, "Oh, you see that guy? That's a slant route." So I came into this space being like, I love watching football. I knew like some of the basics, obviously, but when I even was playing with the boys in high school, I didn't feel comfortable to ask these, and I want to call them like elementary questions. So I kind of just made my way and did my own kind of thing, but I didn't have that hands-on teaching moment that many Pee-wee football players get because there was no women's Pee-wee football team at the time. So I wanted to create Football School so I can open up this conversation, whether you're an adult or a little girl or a little boy, to say like, yeah, there's no shame in not knowing what a fourth down means. Like, there's no shame in not knowing how many, my friend, we were talking the other day, she didn't know how many points a touchdown was worth. And I was like, girl, you're not watching Football School, are you?
Right.
She's like, no, I missed it. But I think opening this conversation to which we can comfortably include women from where they're at right now is important.
So I want to actually tangent on something that you just said. That's one of my favorite things when I watch Angel City FC games in LA is the amount of little boys that are at those games and are standing at the fence and waiting for autographs from these female players. And they're not seeing it as like a women's player. They're just seeing it as this really killer soccer player. And mind you, the women's national team has been kicking the men's national team for years.
Period.
So if I'm going to make the assumption that the women's national team is better, I'm pretty sure I'm going to be supported in that assumption. Sorry, men's team. But there's also what I think there's a big upside in women's sports right now. It's they're one of the only leagues. The WNBA just is expanding right to the Bay Area and to Portland. You've got NWSL expanding. Women's leagues in general are some of the only leagues expanding. So it also is giving opportunity for people that are interested in sport business to get into sport business with a lower barrier to entry. So I think that there is kind of a popularization of women's sports lately in the last few years. I hope that it doesn't become just like a niche popularization. It's actually going to stick. And I think that part of the positive support that I'm seeing is these expansion of these women's leagues. Like, how do you feel about that possibly coming to the women's football side? Because I know that there is interest in changes for women's pro football.
Yeah. I think the largest discrepancy in gender equality can be very evident in football spaces, whether that's obviously playing, but not watching. So like, I think 45 to 50% of NFL fans are women. And
I think it's 45 is the actual number.
And it's shocking that that is not translated into the other, into women's football. So you see, I mean, I don't want to even pretend to claim that the WNBA and the NBA are working on an equal level, because there still is a lot of work that needs to be done.
Can I just, really quick, I just want to make a side note on that. If people want to think it's equal still in sports, it's not. So the NWSL, the minimum amount that you can pay a women's player is $36,000 a year. And in the men's league, it's a little under 3 times that. So that is just across a sport that I think is the most popular when we're talking about women's sports in the United States. So if that is the disparity in pay in a very popular and growing sport in the United States, like, the disparity in pay in something like women's professional football is a lot worse.
But yeah, let's talk about it though, because football is ingrained in this nation.
Right.
It really is, and for a lot of great reasons. But if we're talking about business, football is so lucrative. There's so much money in football. So why would they not, or why would they exclude an entire market and not nurture it and grow it when there's so much money in football?
I think that brands are finally realizing that women are the decision making when it comes to consumerism in households, and finally tapping into that a little very late in the game. So I think for me, I'm excited to see when women's pro football becomes more popular, and then we start to have these kinds of conversations where it's getting to a place where they are on TV. There is like viewership, because so Brooke actually won the championship in July for her division, and your game was on ESPN2, right? So it is broadcast sometimes, but let's actually just talk about that. Are all of your games broadcast?
No.
So is it only the big major moments?
Basically.
Right. So again, it's this conversation where we're talking about support, where the barriers to entry are not just economic, but it's also resources, and that includes TV moments. So if you're not putting the content out there for people to be able to watch, people don't even know it exists.
The opportunities are there. The innovation is there. What is missing is the access and the support. So, I mean, we've talked about representation this whole time, but you guys didn't know that women can play, or that there was a women's professional football team. Now you do.
Right.
And it's just expanding upon that.
Changing gears a little bit, I want to talk about you because you're 21 years old and you have all these accomplishments.
22 in a few days.
Okay, sorry. What Brooke was also shy about saying before was that she has walked in New York Fashion Week and in Paris Fashion Week as well. So she is all over the place in very, very cool ways. So a lot of male athletes can just be male athletes. A lot of women's athletes, their athletic time is a hobby or something very important for them, but they have to be other things. We talked about secondary income. So how are you juggling all of this? Like, this requires a lot of balance. So on a personal level, could you share any anecdotes or advice on how you stay motivated and focused on all of your goals?
I don't know if I'm the best person to, but I think it's kind of a blanket across all athletes, especially college athletes. Like, right now we're talking a lot more about their mental health, and it's not easy to divide your attention in all these ways. And unfortunately, on a professional level, women aren't granted that. And I think when we're talking about it, it's like we still have to worry about how to deal with our own nutrition plan, how to find our own athletic facility in which we can work out in the off season. And those aren't things that necessarily the men have to sit there and think about. But me personally, I think what motivates me to do all of it is the future, is the goal, kind of this shared collective. And when we're talking about women and why are they still doing this if they're not given these amazing opportunities, it's because we all share that same passion and hope for the future. I might not necessarily even be paid what I know I'm worth right now, but I don't mind doing the work right now if that will help those to follow. And it's the same thing when I joined the men's team or the boys team. They made my life very hard sometimes, and I did it because I said I did it because I loved football, and that's why I wanted to play. But that ended up not being enough to want to stay on the team because of how awful it could have been. It was the little girls in the stands that would go to the game and wait after. And I remember there was this one dad who brought up this little girl after my high school boys football game and said, and I was like, hey, like, how are you here? Like, they didn't even go to that school. He took his daughter across town to come see a female football player play on a football field. And that, to me, is the motivation behind this.
Yeah. That's actually, so perfect segue to the last question that I have for you, because I think this is so interesting. I want to save time for questions from the audience. And that's just really like, what advice do you have for young girls who aspire to play professionally in tackle football and also want to make a living from it? And adult women also, same question applies, right? Yeah. There's a lot of mothers, like you said, that are on your team. So how do we get to a place where women can have careers in tackle football, and what advice do you have for people that are trying to enter into it?
My advice for people trying to enter into football, number one is don't take no for an answer and know your worth,
right,
and fight for it. There were times in my life in which I had to be grateful for the opportunity when the opportunity wasn't enough and it was not equal. So I had to kind of sit there and twiddle my thumbs, and that doesn't make sense to me. So that's my advice. That's something I've learned. But also, especially to the younger girls out there, it would be to, my favorite saying, do it scared. And I think there's this kind of false understanding that I was so ready to play football and I was so excited, and but I was so scared. Mm-hmm. I didn't know what to expect. I felt isolated. I was the only woman. I was nervous. I'm an anxious person, but if I let that consume me, I wouldn't be where I am today. I wouldn't have been able to experience this incredible game. So I would just say, do it with what you got. Do it with where you're at. And that's the only way it's going to end up getting done anyway. So don't hold yourself back.
I'm going to give a piece of advice to the men in this room, because I see a few of you and I think you all need to hear something. There's a conference that I went to, and one of the speakers on stage, I think she was working for the Commanders or something like that. She was talking, and everyone was discussing about how women are breaking glass ceilings, and yay, and like, how women have to like, we don't need to play the game anymore because there's a lot of us or whatever. And she was the only one that had the counterpoint. And her point was that you still have to be overqualified than every other man in the room going for that position, even now in 2023, to get that job. And it sucks. And as much as it sucks, the more you complain about it, the more things aren't going to change. And the point she was trying to make, and the point she ended up with, was the following. There are not enough of us now to have this system be fair. So we have to keep playing the game until enough of us win and we get up at the top, so that we can then start to bring people up with us. But we're not at a point yet where we can't stop playing the game. So why am I saying that to the men in this room? Is that one of the ways for us to not have to play the game as hard is for you to be allies for us. And there are a lot of women that cannot get what they want and are never going to progress in what they need in careers, and who are way overqualified than the men that they work with, because there are other men making decisions. And so if you are in a room where you can say something or make change, you should obviously always do that. So,
mic drop moment. Mic drop moment.
Oh, thank you. Yes. I wish I remembered her name, but she was great. So I wanted to make sure we had about 10 minutes, which I think we do, for questions. So does anybody have a question for Brooke? Oh, come on. No,
you're not going to ask how my hair fits in the helmet or like anything? Or how I play with these nails?
Too, right?
Yeah, well, that's why it's up right now. The humidity,
Okay, got it. No questions? Yeah, go ahead.
So you mentioned that like how to get people to realize that there is a professional PLL elite is just broadcasting and more awareness. What do you think the next step is to actually get companies to broadcast the games?
I actually think this is a great segue to an issue I know that you help with. One of the free way, and one of the easiest ways to promote yourself is social media. And I don't think that the Women's Professional Football Alliance or the Women's Football Alliance does a great job of this. So Brooke actually helps her team with their social media, because she's realized an opportunity, especially being in New York, to build a presence if the league isn't taking it as seriously. So why don't you talk about that a little bit? Yeah,
so I think to understand that, and what we were saying about the whole football thing, is that there's a market for it. It's just, how do we access that? Right. And with what we have right now, it almost seems like we just can't reach it. And I think, again, it takes allyship, but also other companies to invest in this. Because, and I want to pitch it in a way, because right now women's football is kind of as low as it can possibly get. You guys didn't even know it was a thing. So investing in women's football right now, with the potential that this sport of football has in general and the market and whatnot, it's only going to go up from here. And we're seeing it slowly in like flag football. The NFL is doing an amazing job at promoting gender equality in flag football right now. And they do that for a reason, because, or they promote flag football for a reason, because it's important to get the youngest people kind of like, you hook them in young and that you keep them.
Right, they're fans for life if you understand the
Exactly.
game when you're playing flag, but tackle's a much different ball game.
So when it comes to getting access to this broadcasting and things like that, and getting women's football out there, we need people with established credibility and brands with established credibility. And this kind of transaction of shared credibility is needed to kind of rub off on women's football, because right now, unfortunately, people don't see talent as credible right now. You need more than that. So having big brands backing us, and having men's NFL teams. There are NFL teams that recognize their female counterparts depending on the state that they're in. Unfortunately, New York doesn't have that right now, and we have options too. So it's like, there's like 3 of y'all. Why aren't y'all backing us? We just won a national championship game and they don't even know.
Right.
So again, I think it's just about getting our name out there, but also we need help to do that.
Right, because this, I mean, again, I'm going to bring up the NWSL and women's soccer only because it is like the league that's kind of breaking into these men's spaces the deepest right now. You had some of the best players in the world playing in Europe for like $1 million or so, like women's athletes, and yet you couldn't get like them to play on grass fields or in the proper stadiums. And yet when those men's teams counterparts invested in women's sports this year, oh look, all the women's games are outselling the men's games, and they're breaking records in terms of attendance and ticket sales and everything, because someone finally was like, let's try it out. And like, it's frustrating because I don't think it should be that way. But so I'm a talent agent. I've been working with athletes for 18 years. So one of the things that I learned a lot earlier on when I wanted to like get things to happen because of morality reasons was that wasn't enough. You had to either tell people how they were going to make money or they were going to lose money. And I think that like women's pro soccer is a great example about how when people finally leaned in and invested, oh shit, you're making a ton of money. Like what, Angel City was valued at $180 million today? Something like that. Like Angel City had a 5-year sale projection, and they surpassed that this year in year 2. Wow. I think it's 65% of the arena are season ticket holders. So when you think about that kind of money, that is making these people very wealthy, and they could have been making probably this kind of money a long time ago had they tried to just tried it out. So something with women's professional football, I think it's a great point that there are 3 teams in the New York area, and none of them are figuring out a way to align with the women's leagues. Like I actually think that's a really missed opportunity.
It's another door.
It's like another door. It's also a way for you to get young women again more involved in football overall. And as we discussed earlier, like women, the people in the household, the women are the ones making consumer decisions. And so if you can't afford to go to a football game, which a lot of us can't anymore because after concessions and tickets, it's way too expensive for a family of 4, you have another option if you have a partnership with a women's football league to still get fandom for the Jets or the Giants or the Bills or whomever it is, right? So there is money on the table that's just being missed because there are people that just decide that they don't want to make that decision.
Exactly, it's missed opportunities, and I kind of want to go off on a tangent and drop some numbers real quick that kind of makes this very apparent. It was that 1% of sports sponsorships is for female athletes. 1%. Yet 80% of consumer spending is women.
Yeah.
Missed opportunity. It makes no sense. Why are we not pouring more money into women's sports and women's sponsorship if women are spending the most money?
I've got a very non-PC answer to that, which you can ask me when I'm not on camera. Is there another question for the room? Yeah, go ahead.
My name is Tom. I'm an advocate for women in sports and stuff like that. So my question is in regards to like this cancer month, I believe, and I just want to know about your locker room hazing, I guess, or something like that. Do y'all do that? And when it comes to like playing football, is there any kind of worries about that? CTE, I guess, or the brain,
So let me spin this a little bit. Maybe instead of hazing, let's talk about traditions that your team might have, right? So like, are there traditions that you guys sort of have in women's football that you think are really unique? And then are there any health concerns? So CTE is a big conversation in tackle football in general. Is that also a concern for women's tackle football?
Yeah, so I think it's important because I have played with the boys on a boys team, but I also have played with women on a women's team. And they're both honestly very similar because they
In terms of
share
tradition?
in terms
Yeah.
of tradition. I mean, the game itself isn't different just because like the gender is different. So truthfully, I mean, it's the same game. And I think that will help answer this. The second question is, it's the same game, the same injuries. So, I mean, in high school, a lot of people, when I was first starting playing with the boys, were very concerned about me for some reason, like overly concerned about me. And I was a bigger girl, like I had weight on me, I was lifting, and yet they weren't concerned about the little boy that hasn't gone through puberty yet that was playing on the field too. Okay, but you know what I mean. It was so there was like over concern about me getting hurt,
Right.
when I was in the same position as them, and they weren't as concerned for them. So I think in sharing that, it really is the same game.
So you can get, so CTE and other things are probably still a concern.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's no special injury in football for women.
I actually like that answer because it's the same game. Other questions? I think I saw a hand in the back. No, yeah.
Well, I guess sort of going back to the previous topic, I was just going to ask in terms of like, specifically about Angel City, like,
Yeah.
at least in my opinion, a big part of the draw is the experience of it.
For sure.
You mentioned like bringing your family and then the profitable parts of concessions,
Yep.
merch, ticket sales. Is there any move towards in your league investing specifically in the experience of it?
100%. And I was telling her I was watching the Angel City documentary series earlier. Love it. But something really stuck with me of what they said was, we are making sure to pour into the community,
Right.
so the community will pour back into us. And I think that's really big in women's football right now because, again, it is seemingly so niche right now that we are going to people who have a small interest, whether it's athletics or something similar to football. So we hold like training camps for younger students, and we go to flag places, or just honestly being a form of representation in football spaces in general kind of helps curate this community feeling in women's football. And I feel like in order to kind of build an experience around it, we have to build the sense of community that is so deeply rooted in even like men's football right now. And that's what's really special about football. I loved that about it.
Brooke was at a Dick's Sporting Goods, right? Before the championship game, because the championship game was getting advertised on ESPN2, and there was like a guy like in his 20s that came up to her and was like, "Are you Brooke Singer? Like, do you play for the New York Wolves?" And she took a picture with him, and it was like this really kind of like crazy moment for her. And again, it just goes to this like community conversation, representation conversation overall, like why that visibility on ESPN2 translated to an actual like interaction with a fan. And I think, I mean, we talked about how cool of an experience that was.
I mean, football is an experience in itself, though. So it's interesting to think that that is something that we have to like specifically work on and curate. When it is just deeply rooted in football, we just have to show them that it's there and that it's available and you can access it.
I think we have time for one more quick question. Does anybody have one last question? Yes, in the back.
What are the uniforms that you wear in women's football?
So in case you couldn't hear her, what are the uniforms that you wear in women's tackle football?
Well, that's a good question because I think people kind of have a different understanding when I say, "Hi, I'm female and I play football." And I also like to say, because they're athletes too, I do not play in the lingerie league. So we wear the exact same thing that you see men wearing. So we have the helmet, the pads, a full shirt. We have pants on. We have padded pants. We have cleats. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's legitimately the exact same thing. It's just a women's league.
It's just cuter.
Well, you make it cuter. Look, I think we've got to get onto this next panel, but Brooke and I can hang out in the back hallway if you guys have any other questions. But let's all give Brooke Singer a round of applause.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.